let's begin with this ASEAN finance ministers meeting taking place in Kuala Lumpur and all the conversations happening there, how to handle these U.S. tariffs, and of course the balance with trade within their own bloc and with China.
Absolutely, Elaine. Thanks for having me today. I think clearly the world is uniting and coordinating responses to this American tariff onslaught, as it should be. And I think a lot of attention is paid on what we can think of as tactical measures to deal with this. But I'd actually like to step back and look at this from a slightly different perspective. In Washington, D.C., there's a saying that personnel is policy. And when we look at the role of Scott Bessent, who is the Secretary of Treasury, it's widely acknowledged he's not directly involved in any of these discussions. But I think he is really playing a very, very critical role here. Because if we look at his background, he was one of the key architects of George Soros's so-called raid on the Bank of England that broke the British pound. So I think he exquisitely understands what is the American Achilles heel in this Treasury war. And I think we can understand why did Trump engage in this 90-day pause when he did. Clearly, the equity markets were not a factor. He's willing to take a lot of pain, a lot of complaints from Wall Street investors. But I think what changed his mind was the reaction of the debt markets. And here we can see that the bond market, not the stock market, indeed is king, in that there was a lot of worry about the recent Treasury auctions this week. And without going too much into the details, I think what is happening here is that despite all of the coordinated rhetoric from the Trump administration that this is an existential threat to the United States, these tariffs must be put in place, they must not be changed. Developments in the bond market, in fact, can change this quite aggressive behavior. And I think this is very worth bearing in mind as we think about what ASEAN is doing, what other countries are doing, and in particular, what China is doing to cope with these changes unseen in a century.
Right, and want to briefly mention that Spain's Prime Minister is in Beijing as we speak, also meeting with President Xi, defending his position for even being there. And do you think we could see more of that in the coming weeks?
I absolutely do think so, Elaine. I mean, there's a lot of talk about what countries should do to respond and whether they should work together. In my view, whether it's the EU and China, whether it's ASEAN, whether it's China, Japan, and South Korea, working together in the face, again, of this unprecedented disruption to the existing global trading order is not just an option, it's a strategic necessity. And of course, we see again, these conversations taking place. But I would still come back to these tactical moves are important and worth paying attention to. But I think if we look at how this ultimately may play out, the debt markets really are an important thing to keep an eye on, because I think they will ultimately constrain the U.S. actions in this area. And again, may very well be the American Achilles heel.
Andy, about 45 seconds left. I want to ask you quickly about some clarification from the White House on Thursday, still here Thursday in my time. The U.S. tariff rate on Chinese goods is actually 145%. Do you think we'll see any kind of updated reaction from Beijing to this? And can you sort of share the Chinese perspective on what we could see in the coming hours and days?
Sure. So very briefly, Elaine, I think China has shown resolve and strength and actually is approaching this from a position of real strength. So we see these measured, calibrated responses that match but do not escalate these tariffs. But at the same time, China is also pursuing asymmetric measures as well, including closer management of the RMB exchange rate, also advances in things like the China Central Bank digital currency, the so-called digital yuan, and how it can provide an alternative payment system and an alternative settlement currency for much of global trade, which it has largely refrained from to not antagonize the U.S. But when I think the U.S. shows, again, such disregard for other countries that, maybe China feels less constrained to pursue some of these asymmetric measures.
Andy Mok, always great to get your take. Thank you so much for joining us from Beijing.
Thank you, Elaine.